My favorite sponsor and your favorite sponsor, apparently, because you guys have been going to palomaverdecbd.com and using code BUCK for 20% off your order quite a bit. I've become their best advertiser, and I'm happy to do that for them because I love them as people. They're a wonderful family. They support this show, and I love their products. They've got all kinds of things, including some new ones because of this new farm bill that's been passed. They've got, of course, regular full-spectrum unflavored CBD tinctures. They've got these new THC-V gummies. They've got the massage oil you know about. They've got the sleeping bundle if you guys need some help sleeping. If you're sore, they have these CBD bath bombs, but me personally, I have to go for the cool menthol sports cream. If you guys lift and work out, it's the most effective sports cream I've ever used. They've got things for your pets, the CBD dog chews, pet tinctures. They've got so much CBD salve. A lot of the stuff now has this THCV in it, and it's a minor cannabinoid found in the Cannabis sativa strain. It's isolated from the hemp plant for their line. A lot of people call it diet weed. Anyway, go check it out. They're wonderful people. These products are really good. They work. I promise you that. I use the products that I advertise. Let's put it that way. And again, it's at palomaverdecbd.com. Enter promo code BUCK at checkout. It gets you 20% off of your order. Let's get to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, the icon, the hologram graph, but I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus, but I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. Glad to have you with me here this week, where one of your favorites and one of my favorites is back with us. Father Turbo Qualls is here. But before we get to that, I do want to say we did have our first monthly Zoom call with my Patreon supporters of $5 or more per month, and it was spectacular. My guests were my friends Jonah Martin and Alex Brasco, and they were each a guest. Jonah on episode 237, Alex on episode 238. If you guys haven't heard those, I highly recommend it because what an amazing group of people I've got as Patreon supporters. My goodness, there was a lot of great discussion and some tremendous stories and experiences that some of you guys had that joined this Patreon club. And my goodness, it was great. And so we're going to do it again next month. If you weren't there and you're already contributing $5 or more per month, well, I hope to see you at the next one. If you think, well, that sounds kind of fun to me and I haven't contributed yet, you can at patreon.com/counterflow, $5 a month or more. You can do as much as you want, but at least $5. And you will get an invite to each of these monthly Zoom calls. Like I've mentioned before, they are not going to be in the podcast feed. They won't be on the Rumble or YouTube page or any of that. So it's just this private, exclusive group. It doesn't get recorded. We have a very open and honest chat about all kinds of good things, that a lot of the stuff, of course, that we cover on this show. And it was great to get to know the people that were in that Zoom session with me. So on to one of my favorite guests, Father Turbo Qualls. He's been on, I think this is his third time now, and I love it every time. I get a lot of positive feedback, and he's such a humble, wise man. He really is that. And of course, for those of you who have not heard him before, I'll give you a quick little bio on him. He's the rector over at St. Mary of Egypt, Serbian Orthodox Church in Kansas City, Missouri, where he lives with his wife, Juliana, and their 8 children. He's got a great show called The Royal Path podcast. We're going to get into that, of course. And he's a spiritual father to a lot of people, and he's got a lot of wisdom to lay on us. Every time I talk to him, every time he's on this show, there's lots of wonderful little gems. Some of them are hidden, and you got to listen to this. These are the type of episodes where you have to listen 3 or 4 times possibly. And then, of course, not all of these gems are hidden. It's just outright love and wisdom pouring from the great Father Turbo Qualls. We're going to get into, I finally asked him about his days as a tattoo artist. I've asked him before about his punk rock days. We do get into that a bit. And his current thing of not only being a priest, of course, but an iconographer where he paints icons. So we talk briefly about that, but we get into a lot of wonderful subjects in this discussion. I know you will enjoy it, and I know you're going to want to probably play this one back a few times. It's that good. So without further ado, Father Turbo Qualls, welcome back to the show, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great, Buck. It's great to see you. It really is.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. It's these are among my favorite episodes when I have you on. And I want to get you to talk about two things really quick up top. One of my favorite shows now is the show that you guys have. Can you talk to people about that briefly? Because people will write me and say, you need to get Father Turbo back on. And of course, I'm always willing to do that. But I think you could watch his show every week also. So quickly talk about that. And then I want to talk about an event where I'm going to meet you in person here soon.
Oh, great. Yeah. We, my co-hosts, Andrew and Cyprian and I, we do a weekly podcast called The Real Path. And we try to really approach everything from, as the fathers talk about, the Real Path, which is learning to not err to the right or err to the left. And you can understand that politically, but you can more importantly understand it spiritually, that there's always this middle road, and it's the road that Christ travels and has us to travel, because we can be tempted to go to extremes, either to the left or to the right, morally, spiritually, politically, all the above. So we talk a lot about that, and then it's infused with, a lot of good. We try to have some good fun, and we talk about things that are going on in the world and subculture, pop culture, music. We try to blend it all in because that's our lives, as modern people. So, it's a good time. I appreciate, people checking it out. So that's what we do. This, the end of the month, I'm going to be at the St. Amelia conference, out there in Texas. And it's a homeschooling conference, classical education, Christian education. And, we have a school here, started a school a couple of years ago, Mount Tabor. And, I'll be out there speaking about that experience and about the need, for people to really, make the sacrifices. And it's always been important, but now more than ever, it's so overt, it's so explicit, and it's terrible how explicit it is. The programming, the conditioning, the propaganda, all the things that's being done to children in public school. And so, I would just encourage anyone, even if you don't have kids, but you care about, the big fight of what's happening, one of the major battlefronts is the minds of children and education. And St. Theophan Recluse, he says that of all the holy works, the holiest is the education of children. And so, it's of the utmost imperative that people pay attention to this. Not just this conference. This conference is great, but any avenue in which you can support Christian education, Orthodox education, classical education, homeschooling, because that's where the battle's fought. Really, is for the souls and the minds of young people, and the world wants them so bad, so bad. So, please, I encourage everyone to check it out, and get involved. Like I said, even if you don't have kids, it's a thing that, if you really care. If you really want to make a change, that's where you can actually make changes, is helping to facilitate education for kids.
That's true. Do you guys have a school there, you said, at your parish that basically does exactly that? It's a daily school for young people?
It's a daily school for young people, Mount Tabor, School of Liberal Arts. They're an Orthodox school. And it's wonderful. It's a parish school, but we have people not in our parish that attend. We even have people who are not necessarily Orthodox that attend because they see the value of education. And we understand education not to be confused with what I call schooling. It's not about, the kind of rank and file and just pushing people in, filling desks and just kind of giving them, different, kind of like goals at the day, but it's really about formation of the soul. So it's, if you understand it this way, we're concerned with teaching kids, arithmetic and writing and all that good stuff, but we're concerned with having them understand that these are languages of God, that math is a language of God, that, rhetoric and the humanities is how you understand yourself. And if you understand yourself, you understand history, then you have a better pathway to understanding God and understanding, what is true, what is good, what is beautiful, which is the life of a Christian, is to be in the full frontal view of those things because they're found in God. And so, our school is a place where that is explicitly, intentionally, overtly taught to the kids to help prepare them, not just for the world and how to resist. It's not even charming anymore, but, like they'll help resist the wiles of the world. But more importantly, it's not just about fighting the world. It's about them becoming, rich human beings who are vessels of love and wisdom and all that good stuff. So that's the real work,
It seems to me, and I want to get your thoughts on this, it's easy for me to get turned off and annoyed with modern culture, pop culture, society. Just even, for instance, if I watch a football game, let's say, I mute the commercials because it's just blaring in your face like idiocy to me. And sometimes I see what's popular on social media or whatever, just pop culture stuff. So many things now that I am trying to view the world through an Orthodox lens and trying, but I see inversions of actual virtue, and that's what's popular. That's what's cool. It seems like it's cool to be narcissistic almost these days, and that's preached and pushed, and everything's so ham-fisted and blunt and in your face. There's not even a lot of subtlety, although probably where the subtlety is could be the most dangerous parts. But what do you see that too? The inversion of actual virtue is being propped up by popular culture at this point?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's also understanding, one way to maybe approach what you're saying, Buck, is it's really the promotion of the passions.
Yes.
And let's kind of break that apart a little bit, because one of the things that I think, especially for people who are, excuse me, interested in Orthodoxy or coming to it, understanding that, passions and the passions are primarily how we speak about quote unquote sin. But this is real important to understand, because we aren't just talking about, moral infractions. I did X, Y, and Z wrong. And so when you understand that, all passions are sins, but not all sins are passions type of thing, like you understand that passions are many things, but one way to understand them is that they are inverted, kind of turned inside out virtues, and they begin to now overtake a person. And so oftentimes, a priest isn't really looking to destroy a passion in someone, but transfigure it, So in other words, if you're dealing with avarice, right, the way that you deal with avarice is obviously the opposite, which is, you try to facilitate generosity through almsgiving or something like that. But at the core, this desire to, or this understanding of the value of money, let's say, right? That's not a problem, right? Money's not the problem. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil. That's what the scripture says. It doesn't say money is the root of all evil. It's the love of money. So what I'm getting at is, like, you see these things and they have to be transfigured in such a way that movement is, your will, your mind, your heart begins to move after certain things. So you're moving one way. And so it's not about stopping you dead in your tracks per se. It's about getting you to move the other way, to get that momentum going the other way. And so that's how the world works. And, that's why there's always these pernicious kernels of truth and these arguments, like with the alphabet soup people, like the alphabet soup people, they say like, love is love, whatever,
Yes.
right? And it's like, there's a kernel of truth to that, right? But there's so much falsehood around it, right? And they take enough of that kernel of truth to kind of play on the heartstrings and to play on the deep heart of people. And people's consciences are already, not only formed, but malformed, right? So they're very susceptible to receiving these types of messages with these little kernels of truth. And so it is this kind of inversion inside out, I would say it's intentional, but it is working that way because, this is a hard thing for people to understand, I think, but, this temptation to also look at a binary, have a binary worldview, black hat, white hat, that's a big no-no, and it's a big no-no just because it's not wise and it's just not reality. And it can really trip us up. And so I say this because people, alphabet soup people, anyone who's doing something that you don't find particularly, spiritual or kind or whatever, they in their mind, to whatever degree it's twisted or damaged, they think they're pursuing what's good.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so the thing is, the powers that the powers that be, both in the temporal world and the spiritual world, because they interpenetrate each other. It's not like they care for their minions. I think that's something people miss out on. It's the people in the, alphabet soup, people aren't happy. They're not happy in their lifestyle. It doesn't matter how much they try to kind of doll up with makeup and all of these TikTok celebrities that are trying to influence young people into these types of ideas. They're not happy. And anyone with a modicum of just spiritual sense, common sense, sees that these people are miserable. If you just spend a few minutes kind of going through and seeing the lunacy that's there. But the trick is the temptation to be like, all these people, they're all the problem. Like, yes and no. Because the fact of the matter is that person, fill in the blank, alphabet soup celebrity, they're being mauled by the same tiger that's looking to maul you. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's all a bait. The trap's been baited for them. They're just on the hook. You see the hook, you're not going for it. You see the fake worm on the hook, that's fine. But for them, the hook's already in their guts and ripping them up. And they only have a matter of time before they're going to be pulled out and chopped up, But at one point in time, it still is a human soul, but that was someone's child who there was nothing but hope and potential in. And now they bit the worm, they bit the fake gummy worm, and it's tough. And that fake gummy worm, that little bait is that little grain of sand. And that's that inversion. That's that, oh, this is love, oh, this is what it means to be, narcissism. Oh, this is what it means to be, strong. This is what it means to be, assertive. This is what it means to be all, and there's a grain of truth to that. You know what I mean? There is something to love about yourself. I mean, there's a read, Christ didn't die for us because we're garbage.
Mm-hmm.
There is something profoundly beautiful about the human person, right? But the problem is, the narcissism that's, being injected into our society, it takes that kernel of truth and it just turns it into this gross, disgusting thing,
Yes. Yeah. And then you get on the front of a magazine as a model. No, that's a whole different thing. But one of the things I've noticed in this kind of, as Mark, Claire, and I say, journey, we both hate that word, but whatever, it seems to work.
It works.
Yeah. And this journey is sometimes I still look at things in a political nature. I do love watching political shows and kind of following the debates and where things are in society politically. But sometimes that seems so surface level to me because you and I have spoken about this offline. There's a spiritual warfare at play here. There always has been. And it's using, like, I can see it within the political arguments and discussions and fighting online. But so many people within the political discussions just stop right there and they think it's a left versus right or the state versus the individual. There's all of these ways that they get close to thinking maybe or seeing that there's pure evil or that there's a spiritual element to this, but then they pull back and it's no, it's just right versus left, or it's the crazy left-wing lunacy versus
all the bankers.
Yeah, right.
It's all the bankers.
Yes. I want to talk to you about that and the spiritual warfare at hand here, because part of one of the attractive things about Orthodoxy for me is after I started discovering it, it tied so many things in. It was like, now the picture's put together more correctly and it makes sense to me. So can we talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because some of the kind of cliches or tropes, there's a reason why they're tropes. There's a reason why they're cliche. It doesn't mean they're not true. The problem is that, like you said, people stop short with them, right? So, for instance, if you really want to change anything, you have to change yourself first. And Orthodoxy has always been and is primarily about the transfiguration of the individual. So this is important because, God isn't looking to destroy. God doesn't want to destroy Buck. He wants the true you to be pulled out of all the garbage, right? Now, the reality is that playing that out is simple, but it's really difficult. But it's in that process that you're able to actually cut through the glass and see all these things that you're talking about. And we see that all the time. If we have, most of us will have, a kind of variance of friends. We'll have people who typically, obviously, you and I are talking, so there's a lot in common there besides our spiritual, beliefs. We also align a lot, on other things, obviously, right? But we probably have some friends that maybe don't align on everything else. But I'd say very few people have like the real strong rabble-rouser outliers in their life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It takes real discipline. And I would say that, and this is just me, it's conjecture, but I would submit people had a lot more years ago.
Oh, yes.
But, from the advent of the kind of hurting that society's been seeing since, 2016, that hurting process. And I'm being explicit with that term for a reason, more and more people find themselves more and more in their own kind of echo chamber. Are you following me?
Oh, yes.
Whereas prior to that hurting, we all had people like, you maybe didn't even think about certain things. And if you thought about it, you probably like, yeah, we really don't agree, but you had relationships with people. That's become more and more rare, right?
Yes.
I would say there's a reason for that. Let me digress, Buck, and please pull me back because I can kind of go off on rabbit trails, right? One of the things that, because we're talking about spiritual warfare, and we're also talking about how you discern the superficial levels and all that. So wrong topic, but let me just digress a little bit. In a monastic community, and really in a parish, in any type of spiritual religious community, a monastic community is just the kind of like magnifying glass, like the hot box of it. But a parish is like that. And a family is like that. I mean, it's one of the reasons why the family unit is being attacked, right? But what happens is there is this kind of, it's like a tumbler, right? With stones, you put stones in a tumbler, and that tumbler is how the gems or the quartz gets smoothed out and made bright. Are you following me?
Mm-hmm.
You have to have those rough edges in order to get that development. You have to. And if you remove those opposing types of, gems and stones, then you'll get a measure of polishing, but it will never be what it could have totally been.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so this is part of the problem with people wanting to have, a community, a parish, a family that's just, smooth for the sake of smoothness. You actually aren't able to pull out the potential that you actually need, that God is desiring from individuals and from communities. Are you following me?
Right. I am, yeah.
So the thing about that is as that hurting process began, really first and foremost with social media and getting people to do it on their own, right? Getting people to do it on their own, there's a dulling that began to happen in regards to people's discernment, their ability to kind of see things, their ability to deal with things, their ability to interact in the world as past generations have. There's a dulling down that's begun, okay? And that dulling down part of that has been these processes that I'm talking about in regards to people just only wanting to hear what they feel is their team or what they feel is, they can understand. So that process then gets people into being willingly put into like binary camps, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to be on this team, want to be on that team, whatever. And then from there, it's almost impossible then to see things for what they are. Because the faculties that allow you to do that, people have had them, they've basically been made eunuchs in that regards.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they're like muscles that don't work out. It just it's atrophied.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. So that process is antithetical to the spiritual life in the Orthodox Church. Because in the Orthodox Church, you have to first and foremost really see all of those things that you were trying to run away from, trying to, curate your social media circle, trying to curate your Sunday coffee circle, trying to curate all those things, right? The church is like, well, guess what? Actually, it's in you. All those things that you're trying to curate out, that's actually in you, and you have to face it. But if you don't begin to see that, what you're doing is basically keeping all this bacteria and fungus that isn't good, and you're just basically burying it, and you're allowing it to ferment and to really grow and to germinate. And it's imperceptible to you, but it is. And that's why you'll get people who will be, they attend church and that's good, but they're not really changing. They're not really growing in the sense of being able to, primarily repent, primarily see what is toxic in their lives, see what is not God pleasing in their lives, and begin to, identify it, stop it, and then begin to pursue the virtue that's opposite of that. They're not able to do that because they think that they basically are preserving this thing that needs to get cut out, basically, right?
Yeah.
So that process of doing that within yourself, that's how you actually begin to see what's going on in the world, right? And so what's happening is people, they'll have enough wherewithal to be like, okay, orthodoxy, or okay, truth, or okay, goodness, okay, great. But they stop insofar as I can see myself in it. Okay, I see where I fit in this, and then that's that, right? And they stop there, and and to some degree, it can become just another clique to them.
Yes, right.
And that's essentially what I'm trying to get at is, okay, that's great once you're comfortable. That's great once you've learned enough to navigate the broader community of the church, the broader, kind of having enough of a lexicon of spiritual language to kind of talk and understand certain things. But you're given those skills so that you can actually swim now. Don't just kind of like tread water and doggy paddle. You have to start diving where the cold water is. Because it's uncomfortable. Yeah, it's scary. But those are where the pearls are at. And actually, that's where the real change happens. And that's actually where, it's not like magic. It's not like, what's the book I can read so that I can understand all the symbols and understand all the traps that, the Illuminati is set. And like, you can't do that because you have no idea how complex it is, right? So the only way to do that is to actually develop the faculties that God has given us so that you can begin discerning. But that process means looking at yourself first. And then when you start doing that, that's what I mean by that cliche. Like, okay, yeah, great, work on yourself first. But like, no, I really mean that. The only way to get the discernment to see what's going on in the world is you have to do the work day in and day out. It's like this. We've all seen that person. We've all seen the guy the guy who's just jacked, or the guy who's just like, man, he can he can run a mountain and do all that. We've seen the person who just gets on a guitar and just rips it. Like, man, it's incredible. We've all seen the artist. We've all seen that thing. And we're like, wow, that's amazing, right? Well, where were you while you were going to the movies and eating popcorn? They were doing the work.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? So it's the same thing. When you see someone who has wisdom, we see someone that's discerning things, like, yeah, God may have given them a gift, but God's given you a measure of gift too. Are you doing the work to develop that faculty? There is no shortcut. And that's the big thing about Orthodoxy. The Orthodoxy tells you, and if you're not hearing this, then you need to find a place where you can hear it, because this is what the church teaches. There's no shortcuts, because it's in that process of going deeper that you're going to be able to discern the very subtle things of political movements, the very subtle things of social propaganda, because the church has done that. The church has gone through it, not just with the Soviets. The Turks have their own kind of way of trying to seduce Christians. Like, every time the church has found herself in a situation of oppression, that is the Lord working out her faculties. And we learn from it. We learn from it. And that's why we learn. We need to read the lives of the saints, not just ancient saints. It's almost more important that you read contemporary saints. So, because some people want to leapfrog, they just want to go like, I just want to read St. Maximus, because all the smart guys read St. Maximus. And like, St. Maximus is great, but really, you probably should be reading some George Calciu. You probably should be reading some Father Roman Braga. You should probably be reading, some Elder Sophroni. You probably should be reading, contemporary saints and elders, because they're the ones who are passing the baton. And so they're a lot closer to our situation, and they're going to tell you in a way that you can understand it, the areas where you're weak. Not just because you're an individual, but because you're a part of a generation that's weak, right? And so in order to recognize the weakness, you got to start with yourself first. Then you'll see your family around you, your community around you, and then you start seeing society. And then once that happens, then it's like Sarah from Sarov, acquire the spirit of peace, and 1,000 around you be saved. Once you got it, you don't even have to flaunt it or do anything with it. You won't want to, in fact. Right. And it's in that not wanting to that God will start to use you, because people will pick up the authenticity. They'll be like, oh yeah, they'll see the fruit of you doing the work,
Mm-hmm. Do you guys miss purely political talk on this show? Because if you do, well, I hope you're enjoying what we're doing, but there are still great outlets for purely political and fun libertarian shows. Amongst the top of that list should be Lions of Liberty. I love these guys. I've known Brian and John for a long time. Lions of Liberty is one of the greatest and longest running libertarian/anarchist podcast networks in the world. Quite simply, they started a long time ago, so they know what they're doing. On Monday, John Odermatt delivers a powerful mix of inspiration, health, and faith to set your mind, body, and soul free with Finding Freedom. That's his show. And then, of course, every Wednesday, y'all know Brian McWilliams will make you laugh at all this craziness going on in this world. He even provides a bit of a promise of a better future with his show, Mean Age Daydream. And then Friday, they include shows like Meme Wars or Hate Watch, or, of course, a show that I was on myself, the infamous, or is it just famous? I don't know, but it's libertarians in living rooms drinking liquor. That's on Fridays. That was a very fun show to be a part of. If you go back in their old episodes of that one, I think there's some quite hilarious moments in there. Lions of Liberty is the first step to finding freedom. Listen today to the Lions of Liberty Network, everywhere podcasts are found. Let's get back to this show. I sometimes think that you said there's no shortcuts in Orthodoxy. I think part of that is why some people get scared off by it. Because I'm not trying to knock big American-style Protestant churches, but there's a difference between going to a mega church on Sunday, kind of listening to a TED talk of sorts and going, yep, I'm good. Let's go eat lunch and do the thing. There's a difference that's easier than some of the stuff I've encountered now in Orthodoxy. And I think there's like a whittling down of some of the things that shouldn't be a part of you to expose what's really there. I think that scares people.
Yeah, it does.
Do you run into people saying, I'm not sure now that I want to do all of this?
Yeah. I mean, if anyone who gets to a point where you're getting, 10, 20 years into the church, if you're a convert, unfortunately, even probably even less than that, you're going to find people that not only didn't make it through their catechumenate, let's say, you're going to find people that came in and leave. Listen, this is one of the dirty secrets. There's an attrition rate. Because what happens is, and it's been like this, people get excited about the exoticness of Orthodoxy. They go like, oh, this is cool. This isn't my dad's Christianity. Cool, Or like, oh, this is tough, like in the right way. Like, oh, this is, TUFF, right? Oh, this is tough, like,
right.
This is great, blah, blah, blah. But then, the honeymoon phase can wear off real quick for some people. And it's this process of actually seeing themselves. It's really easy when you're like, I love Orthodoxy because it's anti everything else. Okay. But what happens when it becomes anti you? And then that's where people start kind of dying off. And then, you don't really see them as much. And then they find some excuse. Yeah, that was it for me. Or like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And the reality of it is that they came up against the cross. I mean, that's how to make it real simple. They came up against the cross and Christ began to call them to the cross. And they're like, nope, that's too much. Because I'll tell you another thing. And those of us who know it, we know it. This is going to cost you something. That's one of the things that I think is so, forgive me for using this again, but it is a real pernicious aspect about what I think when from my experience, other quote unquote Christian confessions is that they will say essentially that it's all good, both in the literal sense, like it's all good, it's all pleasant. And also it's all good in the colloquial sense of like, don't worry about it, it's all good. They can, and in both ways, they say that. And it's just not true. I don't there's no way you can read the Gospels truly with the right lens and think that. It's going to cost you something. And a man who's not prepared to go to war, what king goes to war without making preparation? Right. And so I think this is part of the thing is understanding this is going to cost you, and it's going to cost you, not something that, you end up, if you stick with it, you end up saying like all of us, where else can we go? You alone have the words of life. We begin to see this. And so we begin to go on the path of those who bear witness and say, yeah, even my life, I'll lay down. And we begin to get conditioned to say that with authenticity. But all along the way, there's these little things where, okay, what about this? What about this? What about this? And, so in that sense, I don't want to fault people because I get it, because they do run into Christ and he's frightening. You know what I mean? He's frightening. And the reason why he's frightening is because we have these idols and we don't want to let them go. And he says, if you want to follow me, you got to let this go. And we think that that's a part of us. I think that's part of the problem. That gets us back to the conditioning and the brainwashing. The brainwashing is these people think that this is a part of them, whether it's alphabet soup people that think like, I really am this thing. And you're not. You know what I mean? You're that way because you've consumed hundreds of hours and your friends have consumed hundreds of hours of propaganda through TV and music and all those things. That's not you. You know what I mean? Or you think that this is you because you're disaffected for some reason. We could go a million ways with it, but the main thing is that people think that they are something that they're really not. And Christ is trying to really show them the true them. And that terrifies them because number one, they don't know what that looks like. They've never seen purity and truth like that. And number two, they think, well, what's going to be left of me?
Uh-huh.
What's going to be left of me? And they're scared of death, you know?
Yeah. And I think there's even a fear of what will my friends think of me if I change in this manner? I'm going to lose my status or my circles of friends in certain areas. And like, you know what? I don't even know if God's real. I'm having fun with my friends. I'm going to put that off for another day.
Yep.
And then that's kind of one of the snares and the traps that's being set for them, and they walk right into it.
Well,
I think.
No, I mean, it's a trap that unfortunately many youth fall into. St. Theophan Recluse, so I just want to encourage people, you know, if you're looking for someone to get into, St. Theophan Recluse is a huge one, because he's a Russian saint. He's on the precipice, you know, modernity. He's this one foot in, you know, this kind of classic spiritual age, the Optina elders, this patristic mind, this deep spirituality, but also moving forward into modernity as we understand it. And so he's very systematic in the way that he approaches things, which is helpful for us as Westerners. So the way that he lays out the spiritual life is very beneficial for us. Anyways, in one of his works that's been translated, called collection called The Path of Salvation, he talks explicitly about the tumultuous waters that young people find themselves in. And this is exactly what you're just talking about, Buck. You know, like, I'll put it off for a day. I, you know, believe in God. I'm having too much fun. You know, all of these things. It's not just young people, right?
Right.
But it is something that especially young people suffer from. And because everyone is, you know, tempted, we're all infected with this Peter Pan disease, you know? Just because you're not young, you know, in a biological sense, many people are still very young and immature emotionally and mentally because of the way our society is functioning, you know? And so they're much more susceptible to that than they should be as a quote unquote grown adult, right? But that reality, being susceptible to those things, that's another reason why, you know, kind of tying back to education, why it's so important to educate children, you know, to form their souls. But even if we're not talking about biological children, if you're someone who's young, you know, you could be 35 and just now discovering the truth of Christ and the church. Well, you're young in that sense, you know. And so you need to see yourself in the same way a 20-year-old, a 15-year-old needs to see themselves. You're young in that sense, and you need to guard against these youthful temptations to really be pulled to the left or to the right, according to, you know, what's fun, according to the vanity of having people care about, you know, caring about what people say about you. These are all the kind of rocks that a young soul, whether biologically or just, you know, kind of emotionally, will get shipwrecked on, you know? So.
This seems like a complete 180 in topics, but it's not totally. Well, the audience will see where I'm going with this. I love talking about subculture and counterculture groups, and I love hearing you talk about it because I kind of came through a very similar path. First of all, one question I've had so many times, and I fail to always ask you, do you still tattoo?
I'm retired.
Okay.
I'm retired. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm retired.
So we couldn't get you to, if someone's like, I just want one from Father Turbo.
I'm retired.
I got it. But you also, another thing we've never spoken about, you do make icons, yes?
Correct. Yeah. I'm an iconographer, but I'm in the process of painting our church, our parish, you know, doing iconography in there. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Come out to Kansas City sometime, Buck. I'll buy you some barbecue, you know?
Yes,
you can see the temple and everything. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just talk about the subculture that you came from, and if, I think it did, but if it had any impact on becoming Orthodox and how you see some of the similarities there.
Yeah. Well, I came up through late 80s and all through the 90s. Excuse me. I came up through, you know, I don't know if it's formally coined anywhere like this, but just for the sake of shorthand, you know, British subculture. Yeah. So, punk rock, you know, the skinhead scene, oi and two-tone and ska, street punk, all the way, getting into kind of all the various offshoots of that, the mod scene, everything, and everything that kind of, orbits that. A little bit of psychobilly, you touch a little bit of all that when you're in that time period, and so for me, it really was the kind of seed bed that allowed me to get some roots in resistance, right? Because kind of dovetailing, touching back to what we're talking about, this thing about resistance. It's like, that's where I learned to really, before the Matrix was even a thing, it's like, we saw the Matrix. We saw the the world that everyone is following after. I grew up in Southern California. So Disneyland and TNC, surf and skate. And that's all fine. But it was like, there was something that was not only not appealing, but something really false about it to me, and about it to us. And that's where we found tribe, was that, it's, and again, getting back to, kind of tropes and cliches, but typically speaking, we tended to be the people that for whatever reason didn't fit in, or didn't want to fit in with the kind of broader milieu. And so we found ourselves looking for a tribe. And so we found it in people or subculture. So, at this time, before the age of Hot Topic,
yes,
it was really interesting because you had distinction without homogeneity. So you had this multifaceted aspect of subculture. You'd have, punks and different kinds of punks, crush punks, street punks, skinheads, kind of moddy guys, psychobilly guys, metalheads, you had people, straight edge guys, hardcore guys. You had people that had their own kind of different facet, if you almost see it this way, it's like there's this gem and there's the different facets to it. It's like everyone was kind of a different cut on there, but we all kind of stuck together for the most part. At least that was my experience. I know there's some places like Chicago, other places like in the Midwest, Atlanta, that maybe certain factions didn't get along well enough. But what I find was that happened when they became big. So in other words, if a subculture grew big enough in regards of the amount of people that are involved, then they could afford to kind of infight and be like, oh, okay, we don't like the rockabillys, or okay, we don't like the metalheads. But if you were in a place where it was kind of small enough, you tended to just hang out, like goth kids hang out with the punk kids. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But we really saw the world as, something different, and not really buying what the world was selling. The commercials and just the plastic fake life that was being, and so the music reflected that, the aesthetics reflected that. And that's where I really learned to become comfortable, not fitting in with people. That's where I learned to be comfortable with, learning and pursuing things that, I maybe weren't familiar with, but I was like, there's something to this. And that's important because Orthodoxy is foreign to everybody,
Yeah.
And because it's otherworldly, and not just because we aren't, traditionally Russians or Greeks or Serbs. Yes, that's a thing. But even someone who is, because I've known people, I know people who they were Serbian, or they were Greek and they're raised in the church, but they start going into that cold water that I was talking about. They're like, this is not normal, or this is not familiar either, because it's the other world. And so you have to learn to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes.
And the subculture taught me that. It's like you're swimming in it, and that's part of what you're swimming in. And so also getting an eye for aesthetics and kind of learning to understand your taste and what you like and what you don't like and why that is, all those things were really a prep for me by the time that, because ultimately it's like you're going down this kind of rabbit hole. It's like, okay, I'm into this. I started off with being really into, um, what at the time was like new wave and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, what were they listening to? Like PIL. Okay, like I love PIL. Okay, well, John Lydon was the singer for the Sex Pistols. Okay, so then you get into the Sex Pistols, and then you start. Okay, well, what's this? And you learn about the Damned. Then then they lead you into, it's like, okay, well, who's the Stranglers? Oh, the Stranglers. And then you start getting into, more and more kind of like obscure aspects. But what that does is you start understanding like something came from something.
Yes.
And you start following that rabbit trail. And this is what happens with people with Orthodoxy. They start off with something. They're like, for a lot of people, it's libertarianism, and it's like, okay, one of the things about being a libertarian is that you have to get out of the binary dialectic, right? Because you're an independent party, and it's like, okay, obviously I see that the whole dichotomy of, left, right, Democrat, Republican, you see through it. You see through it enough to say, okay, I'm going to align with this tribe. But then it's like you start seeing these other things. You start getting introduced to different aspects of ideology. And then that kind of leads you, and it feeds this desire to go deeper in truth.
Yep.
And even if you don't see yourself as a philosopher, you start having to understand or to gain some sort of a lexicon of philosophical terms and ideas. And that makes you ripe for spirituality. And I think that's why you see a lot of people who either are or have been associated with libertarianism, because just by proxy being pulled out of that left-right dialectic, certain faculties become awakened.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you hang in there enough, that hunger and thirst for truth grows. And here's the thing, I stand by this. If someone's hungry for truth and they're willing to go all the way through, they're going to come to Christ, they're going to come to Orthodoxy, because truth is a person. And I think that's what a lot of us have found, is like, all the truth I was looking for in subculture, all the truth I was looking for in everything, I have found its completion in my Lord and Savior, and in the church. It's all made complete, you know, and whatever's garbage just burned away, and I'm fine with it, like
that's
whatever.
The scary part. That's the scary part.
And that's what people are scared of. It's like, it's funny because he just wants to trim the fat. And it's interesting because if you read in the Old Testament, like in Deuteronomy and the Numbers, and you talk about, the priestly offerings, it's like God always wants the fat. And it's like, he's like, no, give me the fat. That's what I want. And they're like, no, I want the fat. God's like, no, you don't want the fat. It's not good for you. And he's always looking to trim it for us and to give us the good thing. But we struggle with that,
Yes. I was speaking as this episode is recording. The episode being pumped out today is with Father John Valadez.
Oh, really?
Yes, of Death to the World.
Oh, great. How was that?
It was great. And it's one I've been trying. I mean, I know you're a busy guy, but he is super busy. I've been trying to get him. We've gone back and forth with one another in messaging for a long time. So I finally got it, and that episode comes out today as we record this one. And I find it interesting because Death to the World played a major role in pulling me in to Orthodoxy. And so did Father Seraphim Rose. I would call him Saint Seraphim Rose.
Absolutely.
And, there's a lot of overlap there. They feature him a lot. And I got to meet Justin Marler, the creator of it, here in person, and then have him on the show. I've had you on. And it feels like I told Father John, now that I had him, it's like the trifecta of subculture Orthodox people. Justin Marler, John Valadez, and you. But you had so much to do with that. And I don't hear you speak about it often, but the stuff with the tattoo shop and the Bible teachings that you would do, like that was a huge part of Father John Valadez's journey, as we say. And then I didn't know this till I spoke with him. He was your tattoo apprentice at some point.
Yeah.
And
Did he tell you about his secret plans for me? Did he tell you?
He said it and I laughed out loud. It's on the interview. If you're referring to when he said, it was scaring me at first in this Orthodoxy, and I started thinking, God, how can I would pray to God, how can I take him? He's going down this evil path or something like that. So funny. Can you talk about those days for a sec? And the tattoo, I don't know if it was, I think I spoke with you if it was Sid's tattoo parlor or it was near Sid's or something like that. But
yeah, it was near Sid's.
Okay.
It was near Sid's. Yeah, those were great days. Yeah, I mean, essentially we had, there's a Monday night Bible study, which ran for quite a few years. And I ran this Bible study, and it really started off, so I become a Christian, and, by God's mercy, I ran into some old friends, and they tell me about basically Sid's tattoo shop. And then I meet some other friends, and I kind of get connected to this other church where I ended up going, because I was going to my mom's Baptist church, which was fine, but they hated me. You know what I mean? They hated me.
Really?
Yeah. They hated me. And it's okay. I mean, I don't blame them, right? But it's like I was there because all I knew was Jesus, and I knew I was just following him. I knew he was true. I didn't know anything else. And that's just kind of where I landed for a point in time, because my mom had this radical conversion when she was crippled. She had this radical conversion.
Right.
So anyway, basically a friend was like, hey, we have this Bible study, and it's at this tattoo shop. I was like, man, I'm in, And so it was just great being around people who just, didn't spend their whole time at Bible study or church staring at me and being like, why is this guy here?
Too many tattoos or something? Was that what they were like? This guy looks crazy or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was rough. And they let me know. You know what I mean? They let me know.
Okay.
God bless them. So anyways, eventually, it got me connected with this church, and I started going to this other church. And so from there, I started noticing, there was all these kids that were into like this kind of Christian punk scene. But they were kind of floundering a little bit, And so it really started off trying to have like a men's accountability group.
Okay.
And you just kind of starting off and just trying to encourage them. But then, their girlfriends wanted to be a part of it. It wasn't fair. And then so it was hard, but I fought it. And so finally I let the girls in, and then it just kind of started blowing up. It just became this thing. And we just had people. It was really wild, because it wasn't just like, it was non-denominational, whatever. But we had people from everything that were there. All the different churches, they were there. And the one thing was like, it was all subculture kids, And so it was wild, I'd be tattooing all day. And then around, 10 o'clock, we'd shut the shop down. This is the shop that I worked out. We shut the shop down 10 o'clock Monday night. And we would go all night. I mean, it was not unusual to get out at like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, even later, we'd have Bible study. We'd, quote unquote fellowship. We would, and it was becoming a church, it was becoming a church. And I saw, that's where I think that's where some of these seeds of being a father were kind of developed in me, because I just loved them. They were like my little brothers and sisters, and I just wanted them to not lose Christ. And some of them were losing Christ. Some of them were having their first, introductory philosophy class, and we're like, well, I don't know about this, I don't know about that. Some of them were just kind of experiencing life, and that led me to do a series. I was like, well, I want to do a series and just show them why they can believe what they believe, why the Bible is true, why the rapture is true, which it isn't, like all those things. And then as I'm studying these things, and I'm trying to do this study, I'm like, oh, this isn't true. Like, oh, okay, the canonization process. Oh, and in the background of all that, I mean, my story's out there. People all heard this, but in the background of all that, I had already encountered the icon. I already started to encounter these things. So it's like a lot of things were happening at once. But this portion here of, the innocent, naive, how you want to look at it, but this faith that we had, we really were hungry for God in as much as we understood God, and it was tough because the crossroad came as it does in everyone's life. And it's like, my wife and I, it was clear we had to become Orthodox, even not knowing what that meant. And that was, the end of it. And people who became Orthodox, the only ones really, for the most part, who have like still stayed with Christ are people who became Orthodox. Unfortunately, it seems like the rest have fallen away from Christ, pretty much completely, So it's the Lord definitely showed up, and he definitely said, he who doesn't love me more than mother, brother, father, sister isn't worthy of me. So, yeah.
And then luckily, Father John Valadez was not able to pray you out of Orthodoxy, oddly enough.
No, he thought he was setting the trap, but actually the trap was set for him, So,
you said something really quick. I have a question to finish with, but really quick. This is something, I suppose, maybe a biblical question that I have not had. I've not asked enough, so it's on me, not anyone else. But you just said it and reminded me of it. The rapture. Explain why that's not true.
Yeah, it's not true. I'm gonna answer it, I think, in a correct way, because people, when they say it's not true, they say it's not true because it's a new doctrine. The church had never heard of it. It has to do with the Schofield Bible's propagation of this, kind of like teaching, all that stuff. That's all there. But the reason why it's not true is because it takes this aspect and it makes almost kind of like an idolatrous. It makes a moment in the history of the church into like this isolated thing. So in other words, yeah, there will be a rapture in the sense that there's going to come a time in the twinkling of an eye when the Lord comes, and there will be people who will be, the church will still be in the world when that time comes, the judgment comes. But when he calls his people, he's only going to call them one time. It isn't going to be this kind of like, oh, people in the planes disappear and the planes go down because all the Christians are taken to heaven and then the world's going to do it. No. It's like when the Lord calls his people, he gathers them, he's going to gather them. And then, the time we keep moving, it's like the judgment his second coming will happen, and then the judgment will come, both the living and the dead. And so it's taken that aspect that's found in Thessalonians and it's made a really weird, twisted, doctrine, which is a total trap. And I'll tell you why it's a problem. Not just why it's wrong, but why it's a problem. Because some people have caught on to this. There are people who have hung their hat in a weird way on this teaching. And the core of the teaching is wanting to escape suffering. Right. And that's completely wrong. It's like, yeah, we don't run to suffering, but we recognize that if we suffer, our Lord suffers with us. We suffer with him. And our suffering is part of how the Lord purifies us. You know what I mean? And they do all of these different analogies like Lot, and Lot and Sodom and Noah and the ark. It's like, yes, but the ark is the church. And what you're being saved from is, the loss of your eternal soul, not the getting out of, seeing hard times. Because it's like, okay, well, what about all the Serbians in Kosovo? And what about all the Russians who suffered under the Soviets? What about all the, the Syrians who suffered, under the Muslims? You see what I'm saying? It's like, it's not about delivering us from a temporal suffering. It's about we're preserved for eternal life, right? So there's a lot of evangelicals, I don't know about now, but I mean, definitely in the 90s, man, like the rapture was like the core to the gospel for them, right? And so if you understand it this way, think about what happens when, at least in this person's context, they perceive the tribulation, right? Which that could just mean world event. But for them, because they've been an American, it's like, oh no, tough things are happening on American soil. It's the end of the world. Well, it's like, no, it's just happening here. It's been happening everywhere else. Are you following me?
Yeah.
But now they go like, well, this isn't true. My whole worldview of Christianity was predicated upon the rapture. Well, if this isn't the case, then the rest of it's garbage. And then it's just one more excuse for an apostasy, right? It's one more excuse to fall away. And it's predicated upon the wrong things. And it's predicated upon a fear and a desire for temporal security, which the Lord does not promise us that at all. Quite the opposite, actually. Does that kind of answer, I think that's the more important thing to understand about it, is why it's problematic, not just how it is, but why it's problematic,
Yes, and you led me right in beautifully to the last thing I was going to ask you. And it's something you told me one of the times that we spoke. I believe it was offline, not on the show. Becoming Orthodox, the path towards Orthodoxy, in my experience, and now that I've looked into it, it seems pretty common. You can experience some rough times. And I like this phrase that you spoke when we were speaking prior to this interview. You said, like, you can feel the cold spray paint of the target on your back. And you said, lean into it. And I heard you in another interview say, Orthodoxy teaches you not to flinch. So in closing, can you touch on that? And because there's plenty of people, I'm amazed, but I get these messages from people fairly often saying, like, I'm curious about Orthodoxy and I don't know what to read, or I don't know what to do, or I hear it's hard and that scares me. So in closing, can you touch on that message of learning not to flinch?
Yeah, it's really, over your right shoulder on the back wall there. That's what it is. It's that cross. And it's really going beyond just the superficial aspect of jewelry or superficial aspect of some sort of cultural symbol, but it's in the deep, deep meta of that symbol of the cross, and understanding what it means to give everything but lose nothing. You give everything but you lose nothing. And the trick is, you have to have enough humility. What I mean by humility, I don't mean thinking of yourself as, a piece of garbage, but just thinking of yourself less often and being honest about where you're at. That's the first step of humility, really. And finding, being patient and finding a community, and finding, if not a spiritual father, someone who's going to help you, that you can sense at least knows a little bit more than you, and not just information, not just data of like dates or abstract kind of like concepts that they read in a book, but someone who's actually weathered some things. You need to really find that, because they'll be able to not only help you see some of the rocks that are underneath the water that you're traveling in, but they'll be able to really pull you out of it. And the cross, the vertical and the horizontal. The vertical is our connection with God. The horizontal is our connection with others. You got to have both. And you need both, because if you're going to follow after the master, the servant is not above the master. Christ says, they hated me first, they're going to hate you. And they isn't just the world. It isn't just the alphabet soup people. It isn't just the, kind of radical lefty or radical righty or radical whatever, they is especially the fallen ones. And they will do everything they can to get your eyes off the prize, and that prize is really Christ. But understand what I'm saying, Christ. I mean, it isn't just Christ as some sort of abstract mythological principle, right? Which is why, forgive me, I'm just going to say it because I have people. I mean, that's why people please, he does good work. I appreciate whatever, but it's why you come to a point where you got to let Jordan Peterson go, and you actually have to start listening to, because Jordan Peterson's just talking about a mythological construct. He's not talking about Christ, the second person of the Holy Trinity,
right?
Who's person, because when you grab a hold of that, that understanding, you're grabbing a hold of the person of Christ. And what you find is joy and peace. And forgive me, but you find yourself in a way you would never thought was possible. And then you begin the pearl. You get this pearl of great price. And you realize, I've never experienced life like this. And it is wondrous and beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Let's do this, and then you lean into that, and then you realize St. Joseph the Hesychast He says, when there's grace, temptation is to follow. And what that means is grace isn't, God's unmerited favor, as a lot of people were taught. That's not grace. Grace is God's energy, and it's his presence. And when you experience grace, which is what it's all about, we're not storm chasers, we're grace chasers. Like when you become an Orthodox Christian, you go deep, you're chasing grace. That's why we do all we do, because we're chasing grace. We're chasing God's grace. We want that. We want those experiences of being drawn closer to Christ. And when you get drawn closer to Christ, that light reveals yourself, and it's painful. Mm-hmm. And that light reveals other things too. The light reveals sometimes relationships that we lose, aspects of ourselves that we lose. And we recognize that, okay, this is part of the cost, but this is what I mean. You need to get around people who are going to help fortify you to make this, to wage war. Journey's a good analogy, but for me, I kind of see myself as a wartime president. We're at war, and if you don't understand that, then you need to understand that pretty quick, because the war isn't just what's going on with the quote unquote powers that be. The war is also within you. And it has to be waged courageously, and that's what I mean by leaning into it. It's like, if you're getting grace from God, you're learning all this great stuff, but you're not having temptations, you're probably in delusion. If you're like, man, Orthodoxy this and blah, 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 that, but you aren't actually suffering. And I don't mean suffering because you're being an idiot and you're being rude to people. I don't mean that's not suffering. That's just you being an idiot. I mean, you're really trying to do the right thing. You're really trying to change your life, really trying to pursue Christ and do what the church teaches, and you're suffering. There you go. Mm-hmm. That's a sign that you're on the right path and not deluded. And so you need to get around people who are going to teach you and give you the fathers and the saints that are going to help you to go even deeper into the sacramental life, into a life of repentance and what all that means, so that the more hits you take, the stronger you get and the more thirsty you get for grace.
Yes, well put. All right, in closing, I haven't had you plug the website, your church, and I know you guys do the baptismal gowns and all of those things. Those are important.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we please St. Mary of Egypt. I think it's .net. I think, but it's like Kansas City. Just look that up. Check out the website. But especially we have a monastic community here, the St. Elizabeth Sisterhood. Really appreciate any support you can give them. The nuns, they make baptismal robes. So, if you are digging what's being heard and you're coming into the church, God bless you. May God strengthen you. If you're looking for some baptismal robes, please consider looking at what our sisters do, what the sisterhood does here in regards to making baptismal robes. And soon other things to come. They're getting ready to put out some other things to help support the community. And so it's a young community, and, God willing, the community will grow. So please check that out and support the nuns with the baptismal robes, and just see, submit your names, because that's their primary work is prayer. So, if you donate, make sure if you donate to the nuns or you buy a baptismal robe, make sure you put names in so they can be praying, because we have daily services here, and the nuns daily pray for the names that are given to them. And prayer is our primary weapon. So.
Excellent. Father Turbo Qualls, thanks, man. Thanks as always for being here.
Thank you, Buck. God bless you.
Sir. Thank you. Thank you guys for tuning in once again this week. As for this, I've already told you about the Patreon club, patreon.com/counterflow. Counterflowpodcast.com is the website. We've got the Telegram group. A lot of you guys are going strong in there still, and we're just kicking out those spam bots as they come in. So that's been nice to get those out quickly. Let's see, Twitter, @BuckRebel, BuckRebel. And I've already got a wonderful guest lined up for next week. And I'll tell you this, here's some hints I will give you. The topics that we will discuss are a little bit spicy. He's a great man. The topics are what you might call, at least in 2023, fairly controversial. So there's your hints. Until next week, you guys, have an awesome one. See ya.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram graph. But I placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.